going to conferences all the time is the main driver for progress in your skill set and also your relationship, and basically any professional can become a better professional by attending conferences.
It's not the standard, okay? It's a movie theater, but the visual is great and the sound is great, and I've seen a lot of room and space, and I think it's organized well.
Seeing all the people here today and they're excited about stuff, you can see the energy and the desire to learn and do new things.
And I was positively surprised about the depth, the technical depth of the sessions, and how that makes the tester part of the team.
I think developers do benefit from coming to QA conferences, just the same as testers can benefit from going to dev conferences. You've got to have a broad understanding of what's going on.
It's really inclusive. I would say it's super diverse. People are really, really open and friendly, and it's really organized.
Conferences are well worthwhile just for the ideas that they spark in people. When people come back to the office, they're full of ideas and they're all energized up.
Hi, my name is Renato. I'm the principal cloud architect at Funable, a software company based in Silicon Valley. And I'm based in Berlin in Germany, and I'm Italian. Today I'd like to talk to you about the geolocation challenges when dealing with disputed territories or partially recognized states, and almost all how to test those scenarios in web application and mobile clients, and why that is important.
Hi, my name is Renato, and today I would like to talk to you about geolocation and geopolitical challenges when we develop and test application and websites. Behind me, there's a big map of the world. There's a map that until a few years ago, you could just find in any IKEA shop. And that's about 2 meters wide. I bought it 10 years ago. Quite nice piece of furniture, quite cheap. Unfortunately, that map is not anymore in the IKEA shops. Why is not there? Can we go now back to the presentation? We see in a second, that's our map. It's not there anymore because when that map landed in shops in South Korea, there was a big backslash in South Korea about the labeling of the sea between Japan and South Korea. And that sea that is called the Sea of Japan on the map is actually called East Sea for South Koreans. Now you can find that map on eBay for about 500 euros. It's a collectible, rare piece of furniture, you can call it. A bit more expensive. And it was in the news for quite some time in 2014. IKEA was basically did the only thing they could do. Recall the map, get it back, and get rid of it. IKEA still sells map of the world. There's now a map that is much cheaper. It's not anymore 100 euros, it's $20. And if you look carefully at it, it's quite a simple, plain white map. What's the advantage of that? Well, it's pretty hard to have challenges or any discussion with make anyone unhappy if you have a map that has no names. Well, what has that to do with software? That's IKEA, that's a furniture company, has nothing to do with software. Right, so unfortunately those kind of issues surface as well with many software company, with big software company, with mapping almost all, with geolocation challenges almost all. This was in the news last November, end of November, the 27th of November on the homepage of BBC was this article. Apple changes Crimea map to meet Russian demands. Now let's forget the topic. Let's forget who is right, who is wrong, what's the right approach. The thing was in the news. Well, one day later, the main headline was Ukrainians condemn Apple's Crimea map change. Because when he's in the news, there's some backslash. Someone is going to be unhappy about that change. And one more day later, that was the main headline. Apple to take deeper look at disputed borders. The problem is when you start to look at disputed territories in mapping and application or name of countries or partially recognized states or states that change name, usually when users start to realize it, is usually too late. I would like to share a personal story first. I'm actually a software developer. I grew up as a software developer. And a few years ago, my name is Renato Losio, I live in Berlin. About 3 years ago, I decided to, with some friends, I'm a runner, a very poor, slow runner, barely fit, but I enjoy really running. And with some friends, we decided to build a product for runners that was supposed to be connect runners around the world, share races, build a community. So we started to develop the product. There was, of course, a sign-up page. We built the sign-up. That's how you sign up. You start to type your address, your city, where do you call on? My case was Berlin. You have few choices. And of course, I would have picked up first one or second one, Berlin in Germany. Now, of course, we don't reinvent the wheel. We didn't build our own location service. We were integrating a third-party API. In this case, it's Mapbox, but usually it doesn't matter which specific server you're using. The key point is that for most location services, you are integrating third-party. And when you're integrating third-party, you can blame them, but at the end, users see your product, don't see the backend, don't see what is running behind. So, well, we built the product, we were very happy. We went back to one of the founders and showed our first iteration, first product. We had tested it, we were super happy. We were expecting that feeling like we are gonna change the world of running with this application. And well, one of the two main founders, the CEO, was actually based in Hong Kong. And he tested the application. That was how the application will show on the homepage was our community, welcome to race-based world that now is dead and forgotten, but you could have users from around the world like Bulgaria, Singapore, France, United Kingdom. Unfortunately, our founder was in Hong Kong, and the first feedback we had was not how cool the application is. The first feedback we had when he was testing it was Hong Kong people won't use it. It is pretty offensive here. What was wrong? I mean, that was 3 years ago, even before all the issues that happened in the last few months in Hong Kong. Well, the issue was this one. The issue was a user in Hong Kong was signing up, and according to the specification, according to the JSON object we were using from Mapbox, the agreement was that under the name we were showing the country name. The country name for me in Berlin is Germany, and for John in Hong Kong was showing China. Now, forget who is right, who is wrong. When your CEO who is targeting a community of runners in Hong Kong tells you people are not going to use it, you have a problem. So, isn't that an official name? I have no idea about politics. I don't care. I might care, but I'm a software developer. I'm a tester, whatever. I want to follow the specs. And is there any official name I can use? Well, yes, there's the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. Something that you hardly put in a user interface. So, well, I blame, of course, my next step was to blame the third party, so blame someone else. So I went and say, well, it's not my fault, it's Mapbox's fault. And of course, I ping user, open a ticket, and the feedback we had was the most obvious one. Well, most of our users feel that Hong Kong is China. End of the story. Again, right or wrong doesn't matter at this point. How did we decide to address the problem and make what was the final requirement for the user was, well, in certain specific area of the world, we decided to use what is actually a very common paradigm, is the no country approach, is any information that can disrupt your user, hide it. Why? Well, at the end, users are not there to decide if country A is country B, or if name A or if name B is correct. They're there to use your product and to, in this case, for example, a running application for runners. So the less you confront them with things that maybe they are not too much happy about, the better it is. So how do we address it? Well, we decided for certain specific area, instead of showing the country name, we were showing the region name that was in the object, JSON object. Key point here is that was the final version. So you can see that, for example, it shows now Hong Kong. We were not saying that that was the country. Nowhere we state that is a country. And that's a key aspect. You may say, well, so what? I mean, okay, small unsuccessful application, a small unsuccessful project is already dead. Okay, yeah, you cared about Hong Kong, but corner case for most application? Who cares? Well, you might be right. I mean, I'm Italian. I go on holiday in Puglia, and if I take picture in Puglia and upload them on an online application and think about location, it's not a big deal. I mean, there are no controversies there. People usually, when they go on holiday, they don't even remember where they were or the extra name of the place. So who cares if it's correct or not, or the label is perfect or not. But there are many places in the world where that matters, many more than you might think. I like this message from The Economist of last year. Is a message that we need to keep in mind. Is in Europe, US, Australia, and we Hong Kong as well, the majority of people are already online. So in what is so-called labeled developed world, 81% of people are online. And there's not going to be much growth there. Even in China, most people are already online. Now it was 58%, now it's over 60%. And there's room for growing more than in Europe, but still, there are many other countries where currently only a third, just over a third of the population is really online. So the next billion user for worldwide application is not coming from Europe, it's coming from the rest of the world. And that is gonna change the way as well we see the world. The way is not gonna be any more focused on US user or European users. Now, there already been in the last few years, in the last 5-10 years, many cases of application, right or wrong, that got blamed for having wrong information on their online services. Whatever was badly tested, whatever was badly developed, whatever they didn't think too much about it, whatever was not even an issue and was misunderstood. That's not the point. The end user complained, and from few users complaining became a big issue. I go through a few examples here. Doesn't matter, again, few things even changed for some of them, but like, for example, there was a headline a few years ago, Google slammed for removing Palestine from its maps. Other side of the fence, an article on Forbes reporting that, well, people were not happy that Apple map was not showing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And they were taking the fence that most countries in the world were not recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. What was the message? Quite a strong one. Let's hope this Apple map epic fail does not set off another Middle East conflagration. Well, we might say that most likely a software bug is not, or a software challenge is not gonna trigger a war. Well, apparently in the past there was that case as well. Google Maps error sparks invasion of Costa Rica by Nicaragua. Now, there was a small corner case, but there have been a few in the last couple of years relating mainly to China, and for quite simple reason. This is a headline from the Financial Times, was a multinational face nationalist era of China consumers. Why? Again, we are expanding our markets, and the problem was quite simple. It was not just software company. It was actually airlines, Qantas, fashion brands like Zara, Marriott, hotel chains. What was the issue here was that in the app or in the website, they were in a drop-down list labeled as country. They had entries like Tibet and Taiwan. Now, again, doesn't really matter what's right or what's wrong for you. Or you might want to take a political stance, that's your choice then, but most cases, people didn't even know. They were just grabbing a list of country or a static drop-down list from somewhere online, copy, cut and paste, and put a label there, without really thinking that in certain area of the world, maybe they don't share the same views or the same ideas. How did they react? Well, most of them simply, as they got their website really blocked, they decided that, well, the easiest way was to apologize and say, well, we got it by mistake, was not really intentional, sorry, and usually that works and usually makes some other people unhappy, as we saw in the case of Crimea. Now, that was not just a few. When a problem surfaces, people local users start to look around for other examples. So many websites in the following days were actually ended up in the news, and usually what was called by the BBC a witch hunt, and basically because brands like Versace, Samsung, they all had very similar issues. Now, there are even more recent one that's from last week, even countries that decide to change their official border, so you might have maps that are different, but that doesn't really matter there. The real point is who holds the responsibility in a development team. I develop a web application, I develop an app. Is the developer who is developing the code? Is the tester that didn't figure out the case? Is the project manager? Actually, most people are not even supposed to know those information. I mean, as a background, I'm an engineer. I don't have as well the information to make choices or to know what is supposed to be right, wrong, or what are the challenges as well. I might build my test cases using a fictitious country like Moldavia, or I might build my test cases using some images that I just took with my smartphone of my cat in my living room. And that's sometimes a challenge. Is there a quick fix? I mean, how do we fix those kind of issues? Well, we saw before we can remove the counter, but most of the issue apply in the case of reverse geocoding. What is reverse geocoding? Reverse geocoding is a very simple word, a very long word to talk about something really simple at the end. It's just you take your latitude and longitude, two numbers of a point in the world from your GPS or whatever other tracking system you're using, and revert it to a label, to a place in the world, a name that has some meaning for the end user. And usually you build labeling, you put a label that my picture was taken in Puglia in Italy during the last holidays. You build some smart album, you build some machine learning around it. You can do many things, and usually you want to provide some extra information to the user. So I take this picture, I work for Funable, and we build a product where people upload pictures and you get some extra information on top of it. So for example, this picture was taken in Milan. And again, the key point here, place taken, Milan, Lombardy, Italy, is usually you want to show a meaningful information like Milan or maybe the area in Milan, but you don't want to give the street address because you want to aggregate picture and have album that makes some sense. Those algorithms might be behind the scene, might be something that you develop internally and test with pictures in around your office or your few offices if you are spread around the world, but often you tend to forget that doesn't work everywhere. So this picture was taken in Milan, the office of the company is nearby, all great. Unfortunately, when I upload a picture taken in Hong Kong again, this is running in the trails in Hong Kong, the same algorithm that was using geonames to decide which one was the largest city nearby. And it makes sense because you don't want to say the exact address, you want to say the largest city nearby. Well, actually, unfortunately, close by, the nearest largest city was actually Shenzhen in China, and that makes no sense for the algorithm. You're saying that mountain is in Shenzhen, and that's not the case. So catching those bugs means to have, first of all, test cases and pictures that make sense, that they are not just taken around your office. Again, then you have to decide as well how to show that information. This picture is a very cool picture taken on the Black Sea. Well, now the problem is, how do you show this information? I mean, this is Crimea. Probably your audience in Russia wants a different labeling than your audience in Ukraine or in Europe. And maybe not showing it or just showing the region sometimes works better than showing the country. So usually the country is the hardest bit because it's the one where it's more a Boolean choice what to do. But when and where those problems usually surface? Well, usually, of course, they surface for disputed territories and partially recognized states. And that's the main issue that when we talk about the next billion users or the next 2 billion users is where most of the problems are. And they surface in many scenarios. Well, the basic one that have been there for 20 years is sign up. Of course, if I have a drop-down list called country, where with a list of country, I might have different problems. I might have entries that are not there that people feel that are independent country, entries that are there that people feel they should not be there, entries that are there with the wrong name because maybe they've changed name but it's not recognized everywhere. You might have different cases. You might have a list that are old enough that, yeah, country lists don't change that often, but they might change. There are people that are still using country lists from the 15 years ago, and that doesn't look that good. Addresses and phone number, of course, might pose a challenge, but usually a bit smaller because when you deal with e-commerce, for example, you're dealing with local deliveries and the local audience, you know what they expect to have. Mapping, we saw before reverse geolocation, but as well many other problems in mapping. We see them in a second. Geolocation in general, but as well much more recent technology like image recognition service. If you think about, we talk a lot about face recognition and the challenge of face recognition, but there's as well object recognition. You have services like from Google to Amazon that offer those services. If I put a picture of the Tour Eiffel in Paris, I expect that it tells me that's from Paris. Well, that works easily for Paris, but there are other places in the world that are not straightforward. And as well, voice interaction. We see it in a second. Voice interaction has two different kinds of problems. One, on one side, that's the big advantage as compared to a label in a website. You have much more freedom to provide a better explanation, a better answer, because you can give a longer answer, basically. On the other side, voice interaction has the big problem that people can more or less ask whatever they want. But let's go to the basic. Labeling. How do we solve the labeling problem? Well, this is an example of how Google solved it. Google, that was it's not even the most recent, but anyway, the concept is the same sign-up page. Either you don't show at all a country, because most of the time you don't even need that information, or you might get it from the phone number, you might decode it, you might don't have to ask the user. But if you really want to ask, for example, Google is offering a list where it defaults to the local one, in my case, Germany, so English name, and in brackets, the local name. But it's called location. There's no country there. The label is location. And they even say, when you go over the location, the highlight is, this is your country or territory of residence. And you can see already in that list, there are entries like the Arar Island or whatever that are not technically independent country. That gives much more freedom in how to handle those kind of problems, because the end user is going to see it in a much more neutral way. So again, between location and country, usually go for location and try to, or even put nothing, because if you don't put a label there, it's quite obvious what you, in that drop-down list, what you expect to have. You might follow some standard. If you said at least you might follow a standard for country name, follow it properly, keep it up to date. Make sure that, yes, they are static lists, but have a process in place to check when they change. Make sure that there are no missing entries. Make sure that when names change, for example, Macedonia, finally after 30 years last year, they decided to have the name as the Northern Macedonia as the official name. Well, it looks quite good to make sure you have a process in place to track those kind of issues and fix them. And as well, a common approach to those kind of issues is to use localization. So according to the language of the user, you might have slightly different entries, not just as a translation, but as well as a meaning. Mapping. What kind of problem you have with mapping? Mapping has been there for over 10 years. If you show maps of third-party provider, make sure that you know what kind of problem you might face in certain areas. So, because not all of them adapt in the same way. So a common approach, again, is to hide information when you don't need it. This is, for example, Bing showing a map of Italy. If you type Italy, you see that the border of Italy are highlighted because, well, at the end, there's no controversies on which are the actual border of Italy. If you try Israel, the borders are not there. It's not that Bing forgot it. It's that they prefer to show a more neutral information to the user. So anytime you can avoid to show an information that you might feel that some user might not like it, well, it's usually a safer approach. Actually, it's not the only one. Google has over 30 countries that show no boundaries. And you think, well, 30 countries out of almost 200 is not a big deal. Well, actually, in the 30 countries, you have a country like Russia, China, India, Ukraine, Albania, whatever. If you already think about Russia, China, and India, you're already talking about half of the population of the world. So the other way to see is that most of the population of the world doesn't even have boundaries on Google Maps. There are actually very good presentation explaining you how to handle them for specific issue. Like there's this video from Human Interest that shows very clear how Google Maps is different in other countries. So a common approach for the largest provider is to actually show very different information, whatever is controversial, or not according to the location of the user. Either it's done by language, or it's done most likely by IP address, or any other information that can help the provider of the information to know where you are. Common challenges, of course, as we saw at the beginning with Berlin is, and Hong Kong is auto-suggestion, because if the user is allowed to type whatever they want, there's no problem. But when you start to auto-suggest, how can you handle those problems? Is, first of all, see that different providers have different approaches, and copy those approaches. Use their API, know how they handle it. At least you can say, well, I'm doing as Google does, I'm doing as Facebook does, I'm doing as Microsoft does. You might like it or not, but at least there's it's not, don't be too creative. So let's see, because even different providers do it in a different way. I mean, of course, if I do it in Berlin, maybe, or in Paris or in Milan, they all provide the same information. But if I do it, for example, in Jerusalem, you already think about that. As a city, you have already very different name in mind. I mean, different people, different audience, even just sticking to English, when we're not thinking about Hebrew or Arabic, just use English. Very different name might already give some feeling of what user expects. So Palestine, Palestinian territory, different names are used for the same area or partially different areas. West Bank, East Jerusalem, and so on. Facebook, you can see, for example, if you type Ramallah, it tells you it's a city in Palestine. So let's test the different provider to see how they handle it in different cases. So let's check the city of Ramallah. And let's check East Jerusalem. Now, Facebook, common approach is, if you type Ramallah, you see that there's a city they mentioned actually as a Palestine. They don't say it's a country, but they highlight the name Palestine. For Jerusalem, actually, if you type Jerusalem, don't even type East Jerusalem, type Jerusalem, you see that you have different options. You say that East Jerusalem as a city doesn't show a country again. Jerusalem shows instead a country, of course, Israel. Google has a different approach. If you type Ramallah, there are two entries, one with the Arabic name, one without, but basically no country name associated to it. And if you type Jerusalem, the only entry is for Israel or without the country, but there's no reference to East Jerusalem as an auto-suggestion. Actually, if you type East Jerusalem, the only auto-suggestion you have is for a street in the Philippines. Is that a bug? Do they have no idea where it is? Of course, they know where it is. If you actually search for East Jerusalem and you type it entirely, you end up in the right place. It's simply an approach from the from the API provider not to show information in any area that might have controversial views. Bing used to have a very different approach in the past that they changed it, and that's an approach that used to be popular, but actually is now part of history. Is you can see that used to be two different entries for East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, Israel, East Jerusalem, West Bank. That's kind of an interesting approach. Now the entry is West Bank and one without a country. Now voice, we say that voice is different. Well, voice is very different as a problem. And if you think about it, I will say this, you have two different problems with voice. One is, of course, the good part is, instead of saying this is Israel or this is Palestine, I can simply explain the problem. At the same time, I might ask whatever. So you play with Alexa. I would like to do it live, but I'm not sure it will work. So I just do it with slides. You can ask, what's the capital of Israel? Well, things change. In the past, the message from Alexa with machine learning was the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. They changed that to a much longer answer and less controversial. That is, Israel has designated Jerusalem its capital, but this has not been formally recognized by the international community. You can play that with many different problems. So if you ask where is Crimea, you have a very long story. We can go into details, but it doesn't really matter. It's basically a way to avoid to give a more accurate answer without having to take side or to have an answer that might upset users. Unfortunately, as we said at the beginning, with voice, you might have the problem that the user can ask anything. So the most important thing to test in voice interaction is error cases. So if you ever develop a skill, a voice skill or a voice interaction thing that simply say, and it takes the country name from a list and say for any other entry, I don't know this country, you're actually asking for problems. You just have to test use cases, assuming always safer answer. Where safer answer is probably, I don't have information for that country name, or I don't have information for X, instead of simply say that's not a country. Alexa is also a country. Well, Alexa, when doesn't want to take place, did what I did at the beginning, trying to blame someone else. So according to Wikipedia, because there is a landlocked territory, so blame someone else, basically. Let's talk about solution, because that's what we want to talk about. You're not going to solve this problem. When you test as well, you have no chance to test every scenario. Have no chance, unfortunately, to make every user happy. The minimum goal should be, unless you really have a stance that you want to highlight. So, for example, if you have a company that gets grants for a specific government, you might have to follow specific requirements from the specific government. That's fair enough. But otherwise, you usually want to minimize the impact of those problems. How do you minimize those problems? Internationalization of your app and localization is often an option, because often the problems surface in a different way in different languages. The problem with that increases a lot the testing part. Hide and removal information, as we saw at the beginning, is the more you don't show that information, the better it is, because at the end of the day, users are there to buy a product, to test, find, I don't know, the next marathon they're going to run or whatever, upload a picture of their holidays. They're usually not there to find controversies. It's just that the moment they figures one out, then is when problems start to surface. You might have some, as we saw at the beginning, forgiving labels. So instead of saying country, maybe say territories whenever you are in doubt. And as well, don't be too creative. Do as big players do. Try to follow a pattern. Test almost all your audience. Think about where your audience is. Almost if you are extending your application to new country or new territory, it's not simply a matter to test the dictionary list of that specific country or that specific translation on that languages as well. Sometimes to test if the usability of your application still makes sense in that area. Very recently, from last year as well, major API providers are making things more dynamic. So like, for example, Macbox now has the option, according to the IP of the user or to the language of the user or to according to a specific parameter in the request, you can even set country border according to a specific country. So they have views according to, at the moment, I think 3 major countries, so Russia, India, and Pakistan, I think. So this is in the picture, the example of how the same territory shows according to users in different countries. So that's something to keep in mind. So as well, when we test a problem reported by a user, we need to make sure we are in the very same scenario. In that case, means usually being in a VPN to test how it works for that specific user. And which tools we can use to play with those things, how to test the application. Well, first of all, in terms of names, there are open source databases like GeoNames that are very easy to use to automate a set of unit tests or a testing tool to play with different names according to specific addresses or specific location. There are, as well, of course, using a VPN, there are many that allow you as well to do it automatically and have as well command line that you can use to automate that part and test different things in different countries from different IP addresses. You can go to Jerusalem to take a beautiful picture of Jerusalem, or you can go to wherever you want to take a nice picture of a country that creates problem. But at the end, you can as well build your test suite using modifying, for example, the data inside the picture. So an application, a simple application with like PhotoExif editor can allow you to create pictures that simulate specific scenarios. Google Stats as well is a mine for those kind of information. According to the location of a user, you can figure out which one are the most common name used according to search. So that's as well something that can be easily automated. And as well, when you build test cases, keep in mind comparison for those challenging scenarios. But the key point is, why do we want to do that? Well, of course, we say it's not a corner case. Of course, we want to say we want to avoid complaints. We want to avoid a PR disaster for our company. We want as well to train our engineering team from QA to product manager to developers that those problems may exist. So it's good to keep an eye on them. So make people aware of those problems as well, because at the end of the day, when I build my application, I want to care about all my users, unless there's a specific goal on my application. But usually I want to build an application for runners to find their best running events around the world and join together. I don't want to make anything else. So the key message is, think about the implication of what you're building and testing, because your audience might have a very different feeling about that. With that one, thank you. Most of the resources and the links of these slides and many articles I collected on the topic are on this URL, so you can find most of them there. And happy to take questions now. Let me check if there's any. See none at the moment. Or my Slido doesn't work. Yes. Is there any tool to automate geotesting? We say not that I'm aware of, but it's a very good point. Unfortunately not. Do you think there is a place for markings that signify contested or controversial on territories, say marking that are in stripes of two colors? Yes, some websites still do that. The main problem with that approach is that not every users fully understand that that's the case, and doesn't look that great to highlight it in that way. So I have the feeling, I don't have many data to support that feeling, but that the trend is to go more from disputed highlighting with a dotted line to simply don't show the line. At least that's what the major providers are doing. Do you think there is, it's actually not a question, just want to say that it was interesting presentation, did not talk about that controversial countries problem. Thank you. That's actually one of the main goals of the presentation. One of the problem I had, that was how I started the problem myself, was I had no clue. I mean, I was faced by the guy who founded the company saying, this doesn't work. My first reaction was, well, not my problem. I did everything according to specs. It took me some time to realize that actually he had a point, more a point, like at the end, the goal of my application was not just to pass an automatic test, was to make the end user happy and comfortable using it. What about times where hiding is not an option? It's better for users to decide to call or to go with controversial or more common options. I will say I tend to prefer, even if it has complexity, to let the user choose. That's a personal opinion. The only case where that doesn't apply is, as I quickly mentioned, is there might be constraints that force you to act in a certain way. And they might be good or wrong, but at the end, in some sense, simplify your life. For example, here in Germany, most countries, I know the list from here in Germany, I know the one from the Foreign Office in the UK, provide official name according to that specific government. Almost all, if you are part of a public enterprise or if you receive public funds, you might be, not forced, but you might be encouraged to use that name and following that one. That's usually simplified because you have less choice. At the same time, you might face more backslash, but that's part of life. But usually, whenever possible, I will tend to offer, if there's no way to hide information, I will ask the user to choose as much as possible. Yes, good point. Cloud device service can provide devices from certain location. Yes, very good point, because actually I forgot to mention that is, yes, from AWS, that you can test real devices, and you can really, for example, you can test your phones in very different regions and different countries, and other providers as well provide phones with specific language setting and with specific country location, both on SIM card and without. That allow you to test and automate, and as well the good part of those cloud providers allow you as well to automate those tests. So that's a very good point. unless I missed something, I should have covered each one of them. Happy to join in a second. Ask me anything corner. And with that one, thank you.